Mum Julie.
Hello, I'm Lucy's mum, and we've got a very special video for you today. Vietnam era Air Force Weapons Systems Officer, memories of being stationed in Britain. Welcome, guys!
Yay!
Hi. How y'all doing? I'm Terry, otherwise known as the Murph. Okay.
My name's Georgianna, and I'm his wife.
So Murph, can you give us a bit of background?
I was in the Army first in 1955 to 58 in Germany. We used to hop flights over to RAF Bovington. Spent some time in London doing this and that 18-year-old boys do.
I almost asked, but I kind of stopped myself.
We both thought about it.
I said I think it's better to be an officer than a sergeant. So I went to Ohio State University, went into officer school, got commissioned in '64, did my thing as a maintenance officer, and then selected for flight school. And then, thank God, got into F4s, which is the life of Riley. Most exhilarating time of my life. And then, of course, Vietnam. We went to Udon, Thailand, to the Triple Nickel Squadron, which was very famous for shooting down MiGs. I flew north as a fast FAC. That means forward air controller, but fast. And we called airplanes in from the ships. It was very exhilarating, as I said, but also very sad. Lost friends.
That must be really hard.
Especially when they're your roommate, you know. I don't know why it hit me like this morning, but, you know. I want to thank our mutual friend in Norfolk, Richard, who worked for Martin Baker, or works for them, I guess. His seat worked, his ejection seat, because I had the occasion to use that. I still have a bad back, but that's not his fault. I'm alive.
Wow. That must have felt like a mad roller coaster ride.
Don't pass this around, but it's a lot of fun.
You're a bit of a thrill seeker.
Yeah.
You're in this airplane that's malfunctioning and going 400 plus knots, 17 Gs in less than a second. Off you go and you're unconscious, and then you wake up and you're underneath this beautiful canopy down into the mahogany trees of North Vietnam. Very scenic, but scary. Our little friends were running around looking for me. The good guys came and got me in a helicopter, and that was that. And I'd like to end my Vietnam story there and proceed with my trip direct from Vietnam to jolly old England.
What were your biggest culture shocks when you arrived?
The weather. I went back home to Florida from Vietnam, sold a car, bought a small Volkswagen because I know you don't need a yank tank. Drive to Bayonne, New Jersey, or McCord Air Force Base, spend the night, and then ship my car the next morning up in Bayonne, jump on a cargo airplane, and take off for Europe. This is with two little kids under 5.
Not mine. Those are my steps.
No.
Yes.
Our third son, our Green Beret Commando, was born in England in Lakenheath. He's a British citizen, subject to the Queen, I should say.
Quite.
That's what it says on the birth certificate. So anyway, that night we were over eating dinner in the officers' quarters, started on fire. A lot of our luggage and so forth was wet from the fire hoses. And got on the airplane, but they forgot to put the seats in. So at the last minute, the crew chiefs are running around putting in passenger line seats. You know, you strap them to the floor. C-141, which is a huge airplane. And I was sitting right next to a jet engine. Then we flew to Germany. Now, this is all without sleep. It was over 20 hours at that time. Put us in a room. It was about 100 degrees in there. Finally, we're called and we're put on an airplane off to Mildenhall in UK. Get off of the airplane. It's raining, 11 o'clock at night, cold. It was terrible. And I had my summer uniform on coming from Vietnam to Florida, and the kids had shorts. So they put us on this bus. It was like a tour bus. I think it said Tour East Anglia on it. And it had this old guy in there smoking a pipe. And he goes, hello, we're off to Bentwaters, are we? Yes, we hope. And we got on down through those little, English
Windy lanes, country lanes, yeah.
big bus. I'm going, my God. Anyway, we get to Bentwaters. The lights are all out. He drops us off at this big old green wooden building built in the 40s during the war. It was a P-51 base and a Spitfires. Drops us off, and I said, well, is this the BOQ? This is where I get my quarters? He says, I really don't know. He says, I was told to drop you off here. Goodbye. Off he goes. I see some lights up in the distance. So I says, I'm going to seek help. Off I go, soaking wet by this time. And you can imagine a little kid, 2, 3 years old and 5, freezing with short pants on.
Oh, poor little things.
Oh, yeah. So I get to this building, and there's this air girl, we used to call him, and she's the clerk. Clark,
thank you.
And I said, I just arrived with my family. We're down here at the community center. It's raining, it's cold, and I am very angry. And she goes, we don't have any rooms for a family because they put us families in little Quonset huts that the air crew from World War II with the coal stove and the bunk beds. So I said, I said, would you be kind enough to call up the base commander? So I called the base commander, Colonel Masterson, and he said, who is this? It's kind of late, And I says, it sure is. This is Captain Murphy. I just got here from Vietnam, and I want a place to stay. He goes, dead quiet. He goes, I'll have a car sent over for you immediately. He says, I'd love to talk to you later. And I said, I'd love to talk to you too, sir. So car shows up, puts us in these quarters, coal stove, midnight, raining, a mouse runs across the floor. The baggage was all stacked up waiting at the community center. The security police, Americans, had stolen all of my wife's jewelry, which was quite extensive, as I just came back from Vietnam, and we used to fly up to Vientiane, Laos, and CIA helicopters in the middle of the night and buy gold. And there was a lot of it in there. Sapphires, rubies, all gone. The CID and the Ipswich police found it all. Within 2 days, they were buying drugs with it, selling it through a known pawn shop. So quite a saga. But anyway, got that back. She got it back in a divorce anyway, so it was all right. So there we were in this little hut, and I went over to the officers club the next day, and I says, can I get a breakfast for my children? Where do I go? We're on foot. A guy named Philip, who was the bartender, who turned out to be one of my very good friends, and his wife, Linda, who was the cashier and took care of all the bookkeeping. She went back in the kitchen and cooked us breakfast. I mean, that's why we became friends, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
We hadn't eaten since we left McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey.
Oh my goodness, so you were hungry, tired, wet, miserable.
I thought I'd get the crap part out of the way right away. I became enamored with England. I want to say right now, it was the best 4 years assignment in my Air Force career. I was assigned to the 92nd Squadron. Our main mission was nuclear.
Nuclear?
Yes, a lot of people in England didn't realize that we were in their midst with about 100 nuclear bombs. We had targets, and then we'd sit alert, and we had alert pad out on Bentwaters and one down in Aviano, Italy. You'd spend 2 days on alert shooting darts. I got very good at darts. But But we had to study the targets, and we had radar targets, and I was in charge of the radar profiles in East Germany and Poland. It was a one-way mission for us. Everybody was supposed to be given this false hope that we would come back and land in Denmark or someplace, you know. We couldn't get far enough away from the bomb before it welded the airplane shut. It was a very intense. Every day we'd go up to the bombing range in your home turf up at the Wash, right over your house, actually.
Yeah, we heard you. We heard you practice bombing. We always said, oh, there goes the Americans. And you'd hear it, boom.
Well, we did Pole Beach Range, which was on the west side, and then we did Wainfleet Range. The control tower was right outside the town of Boston. And I went up there as a range officer one time and met all those boys, and they had some crusty old RAF guys that ran the range, you know. You get up there, go to a pub, meet your guys, do your duty, get off duty, have another beer at the pub, then the helicopters from Woodbridge would pick us up.
That is so British.
I was going to say, that's the British way,
That
isn't it?
epitomises the British. You know, you go at the pub, you do whatever you had to do, and afterwards, you go back to the pub.
Glad to see you embrace the culture.
That's one of the main reasons I loved England so much. The beaches is where I first lived, in Aldborough. Very much.
Oh, absolutely.
And the pub there was founded in 1415. I borrowed a car, drove out to Aldborough with directions to a boarding house. Okay, it's time for the prop. Wait.
Oh, check it out.
Suffolk Constabulary. It's the real deal.
Hello, hello, hello. What have we got here?
I stopped and asked him for directions to the boarding house. He was standing there like the constables do with his hands behind, you know. And I said, howdy, I'm new here and I'm looking for this place. And he goes, oh, hello. Yes, down here. Be careful how you park. Don't park on the solids. And, you know, and I went, oh, and there I am in a big yank tank, you know, that I borrowed from some guy. He says, my God, that's a big machine. And I said, yeah, especially on these roads. That's the first time I drove in England. I mean, oh my God. And anyway, I says, are there any good pubs in town? And he told me about the Cross Keys. And then he told me about the one that he hangs out in down on the quay, you know, and he says, that's where all the local chaps hang. And I said, where is that? I think that's the one I want. Found it, pulled around. This big lady comes out, very buxom, you know, rosy cheeks with an apron on. And I got out in my flight suit and stuff. And I said, hello, Mrs. Simmons. She says, yes, you can call me Edith. I says, I have a family and this is the story. And she gave us this room with the windows all facing the North Sea where you were standing taking films.
The coldest, the most windiest place on earth.
You talk about freezing your buns off.
Mm-hmm.
I've flown in some winds up in the Wash too, 40, 50 mile an hour winds, flying at 500 feet trying to drop a bomb, you know.
It's reassuring, isn't it?
Can I just say, Murph, I was so happy way back in the 70s that I didn't know that.
Oh, well, back in the 70s, you know, I was still made of stainless steel. And anything. So I got Edith and Eric. That's her husband. He's this little guy, and she's this big woman. She cooked the best food, best breakfast, best dinner. She had the cheese cart, port wine. So then I drove back to Woodbridge town and I met the estate agent. She's going like this, another Yank moving in, you know, he's got money. And you know what a beautiful little town that is. You didn't see half of the shops that used to be there when the Americans were stationed in the area. So anyway, I finally got this house in Woodbridge town on the thoroughfare. There was a J.C. Penney's across the street, furniture store and a greengrocer, and then Mrs. Wilson's tea shop, where my boys, on their way to school with their Macs and their wellies. They'd always stop in there and get white tea. Mrs. Wilson adopted them. She thought they were adorable. I went down and talked to her one day, and I says, how much sugar does Sean put in his tea? She says, about a shovel.
Here we are, Murph, at Dorrit Place, where you stayed in Woodbridge. Let's have a look at Ivy Lodge. Number 1, Ivy Lodge.
That was a big house, 3 stories, fireplaces all over the place, and it had beam ceilings, or about like that. And there were mice everywhere. The boys started naming them and feeding them.
Oh no, that's why they came.
Oh yes, you won't get rid of them if you start feeding them, that's for sure.
We had apple orchard, went down to the River Deben, right at the end of the property, and that's where they used to build the ships. Rumor had it that the Mayflower was built there.
Tell us about meeting the ghost.
So the boys were up on the top floor, and they had nice beds and so forth, and they had this little cathedral ceiling and the mullion windows, and then they had cut glass in this one window, which was about waist high. In the morning, they'd come down and they'd say, we saw her again. The lady that lives in the nursery. They were afraid to go upstairs without a flashlight, but what they had done is they had broken out a piece of glass, about like that, because if they had to go to the bathroom, they'd have to go down past the nursery to the bathroom, and they were afraid to. So that's where they peed out the window.
Smart kids.
I found this out when Mrs. Pleasance stopped me. I'm coming back from rugby practice, and she goes, hello, Mr. Murphy. May I have a discussion with you? Gives me that British business, and she says, I wouldn't walk around this area because that's where all the pee is that I can smell from my front door.
Oh no.
So I said, well, there's a ghost story going on, and that's why they pee out of there. I understand. I will take care of it. Thank you very much. And I had our gardener do some gardening to get rid of the pee smell. 3 o'clock in the morning or so, I'm lying in bed and I hear this footsteps coming down the hallway. And I thought it was one of the kids coming down to tell me about the ghost or something. No, it was the ghost.
Oh, gosh.
It was this greenish form, but I could tell it was female. I had no fear, it just seemed warm and welcoming, and walked over to my side of the bed, stood right there. No cold, none of that baloney. Walked around the bed, looked down at my wife, then walked over to the garden window and was looking out at the garden. There was a connection. That was her garden. And she came back and stood at my side of the bed again for about 2 or 3 minutes, long enough for me to start wondering, what the hell is this thing doing? And it just sort of turned around, went back out the door, stopped at the door, looked back, and then I heard steps up to the nursery.
Oh.
So the boys were right. And after a while, they got used to it and just talked about her. I said, seen her lately? And I saw her last Thursday. Our housekeeper, she wouldn't go there after dark. The whole town knew that our house was haunted. I never believed in that, even though I'm Irish Catholic. I never believed in ghosts, but they're there.
Wow.
They're in England anyway.
How else did you sort of fit in with the Brits?
When I was in Aldborough, I met this guy, 6'5". His name was Mark, and he lived at Mrs. Simmons' house. He was a boarder there. He was the head engineer of the Leiston nuclear power plant. Brilliant man. One day he came up to me and he said, you've been flying all day, haven't you? And I said, yes. He says, why don't we go up to my little pub and have a beer and become acquainted? We walked through this graveyard up to this pub called the Falcon. And it turned out that this is where all the fishermen went. I used to go out in the boats with them. A lot of fun. They thought I was a little crazy. Are all Yanks like you? And I said, no. We're shooting darts, and I met another guy, little short guy, his name was Lee Southgate, and he found out I'm from Florida, and he says, do you dive? And I said, yes, I'm a diving instructor. But he says, I have a shed with an air compressor and so forth. Why don't we go diving? And I said, you're on. We did that for 4 years out in the North Sea, and we dived usually about 80, 90 feet in free fish nets from old airplanes, Heinkels from World War II. We found one of those. We also found a cannon from the 15th century.
Wow.
Albury used to go out. Water table changed or something, the tide.
Yeah, and the erosion too, yeah.
So we found this cannon, and everybody came and took our picture from Cambridge newspaper, and we were in the East Anglia Times. We were called the Anglo-American Dive Club. And we eventually came up with, we had about 8 guys.
Also, you mentioned about playing rugby.
I'm up in Woodbridge town again, flashback. So they had 2 pubs. One was the lounge, it was the posh, and then they had the public bar underneath. I went to the public bar, of course. Being a commoner, I met all kinds of neat people. And the head of the pub, she owned it. And she was quite a character. I won't get into it, but she liked to show off her goods. So she said to me, what do you do? What's your rank? And I said, I'm a captain. And she said, oh, well, what's your job out there? And I says, I'm in charge of all the latrines, making sure I have a staff, and I make sure all the latrines are cleaned. And she believed me. Then she found out that, I actually flew and was a university graduate and so forth and so on. So I've met these guys, Steve Young, Rossworth, and a couple other guys that were higher in society, university guys, Cambridge, London. I went to Ohio State. And they said, well, what did you do there as far as sports? And I said, well, I played a little rugby. I said, that's a pretty good game. And he goes, well, I happen to be the head of the Woodbridge Rugby Union 15. And he says, go blue. And so Anne looks at me. He says, how much do you weigh? 14 stone. She says, got bigger boobs than I have. He invited me for a meeting with the team and a tryout. I did, and I kicked a few extra points and so forth. You're on. We're playing disc on Sunday. So then I had to go down and buy all the jersey and powder blue, white, black, powder blue stockings.
Oh, very good.
Nice color.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was very pretty. And I showed Georgianna my picture on the wall at the Crown Pub in Woodbridge town. It was the winningest team they'd ever had.
Wow.
Perfect. Oh.
And I was always the Yank, bloody Yank, because I usually had bloody something.
Yeah.